Thank you for joining me today and congratulations on the launch of your new book. You're right in the middle of it. That's so exciting.
Yeah, right in the middle. It's 3 days out, well, actually 2 days out from the launch, which was in Sydney in a beautiful little bookstore in Glebe called Glebe Books, which is I think one of Sydney's oldest bookstores. So it was just a beautiful experience.
Wonderful. Tell us a little bit about who you are and what your book is.
This is my first book. It's interesting because I had no intentions of ever wanting to write a book ever. I like the idea of coffee table books and showcasing beautiful things, but in terms of writing, the idea of 70 to 80,000 words just never appealed to me ever. But I've always written short form, so I've always journaled. And in the 90s, 2000s, I always had a blogger, and that morphed into another blog. And so I've always written, and I've enjoyed that. But to the point of turning that into a book just was never on my radar. But going back to 2018, when my mum wasn't well, she had cancer for 15 years, and coming
Mm.
towards the end of her life, we sat down, and it was just right at that time where she lost her voice and couldn't really speak. And she said, "Oh God, I've always wanted to write a book." I think she was going through this sort of reflection on her life and in her mid 60s, and said, "Oh God, I wish I wrote a book that I could have handed over to you." And I just, in that moment, said, "It's okay, Mum, I'll write one." And
Mm.
that sort of hangs over your head, that comment, because she looked so proud and so thank you. And 4 to 5 days after she passed away, I started writing the book. And so that's where it came from. It just came from this idea of journaling stories or experiences that I'd been in. And I think the thing that I wanted to do more than anything was try to understand the places I found myself in, odd places that somehow I found myself in these rooms, and I wanted to understand how I got there. So the journey was really writing about going back and trying to understand how do you end up in the places you end up, and what's the catalyst for that.
So you started writing it a couple days afterwards. And how long did it take you?
Well, it took about 4 years, but the interesting thing about it is when I got to the end of writing, I found the start really hard. Like I didn't know how to write a book.
Yeah.
So the idea, a good friend of mine called Tim Ross, who's written 10 books, I'd rang him and said, "What do I do?" He just said, "Just dump it on a page, just write. Don't think, just write." And I found that quite cathartic. But the challenge with that is when you're just writing, you're all of a sudden, you don't have much structure or much sense to what you're writing about. It just becomes a journal, which is interesting for me, but not probably interesting for you. So I think,
Right.
Kate, if you got the first iteration, you might have read that and gone, "What is he talking about? This was just a self
Yeah.
indulgent journal of my life." And I rang Tim probably a year ago and said, he owns a little studio up in Byron Bay in the New South Wales hinterland, which is, if you don't know it, you should Google it. It's just stunning. And I rang him and said, "I'm ready to finish my book. Can I come up and use your writer's room," which he's got up there, a little writer's room, and finish this? And when I got up there, I realized that I hadn't read it. So I read the book for the first time, and it was actually quite awful. It was just a very self-indulgent story of all the things that I thought I did amazing. But what I found in the thread through the middle of it was a lot of conversations about creativity when we scratch the itch of curiosity, where that takes us. So
Mm.
in the midst of the madness, there was this really beautiful sort of underlying tone around how important creativity is. One of the statistics that I read during the writing process was 96% of kids believe they're creative, yet only 26% of adults agree with that. So I dug into that a bit, and up in Byron Bay, when I was in this sort of 5 days of finishing the book, I deleted 58,000 words out of the book and started again. And that was a year ago. And the process from then was really fast because I knew exactly what I wanted to write about. I understood that creativity was the ability to solve problems and empowers us to do that, anyone, irrespective of whether we think we're creative or not. So that gap between the 96% of kids and the 26% of adults, that was the thing I was intrigued about. I was like, why does that happen?
Mm-hmm.
Where did it go? And what do we do to get it back? And that was my sort of, I suppose, motivation to finish it.
Why does that happen? That's actually one of the reasons I started doing this work too, was that I felt as an artist, I kept having people come up to me and just saying, "Oh, I wish I could be creative. I wish I could be." And I was like, but like you, if you're breathing, you are. Like it's in all of us. It's part of it's like it's the thing that breathes your body. How could you not have it? But the vast majority of people that I encounter in my day-to-day life don't believe it. And it's actually why I believe it's why all of the nosedive that we're in terms of our culture and humanity, it's the nosedive that we're in is because of this disconnection between us and creativity. But In the things that you've read and seen and researched and experienced, why do you think that happens?
It's a very polite way to call a nosedive in regards to our culture and economy in decline. I love that. I think there's a misinterpretation of what creativity means in the first place. I think we're
Mm-hmm.
educated to think that creativity is the arts, or it's painting, or it's drawing, or it's design. I think it's so much more than that. And in my understanding, it's important to note that this book wasn't an academic research piece. So I'm not an academic, I'm a designer. So what I could do is go back and look at the experiences and the stories that shaped where I got to, how I found myself in meetings with Nike or Dolce and Gabbana or Chanel or in these rooms. What was the thing that took me there? And if it wasn't talent, and I don't think it always is, and if it wasn't luck, and I think that plays a small part in it, then it's something else. And what I came back to was curiosity. We can do two things with curiosity. We can be led by it and go and say, where does that take us? What's the unknown beyond curiosity? And we've got to a point where we want certainty in everything, and we don't get that. So there's no certainty in anything. And I heard a really interesting quote by Brene Brown, who I love. And she said that whenever she's presented with an opportunity or a new business deal, she looks at what does her life look like in a year? How does that impact her life? And she's trying to forecast out what happens to the things that she loves now because of that choice. And there's something that's really interesting about that. And I try to do the same thing, but the reality is we actually don't know. That to me is the difference between fear and uncertainty. And they're very different things. Is coming back to curiosity, we're scared of the unknown, but I like this idea of what if we lent into it. And the best way I can describe that is I was invited to the launch of the Dolce and Gabbana nightclub in the mid 2000s in Milan. I was over in Milan on business and got a note under my door to come to the launch of the event. And when I got there, I grew up in a small town in Western Sydney, and we wear flannelette shirts and ripped jeans, and Nirvana was my band. So when I'm in Milan at a red carpet event with cameras flashing at famous soccer players and movie stars that I don't know, imposter syndrome or the lizard brain is real. All of a sudden, I'm questioning how I got there. Do I deserve to be here? Don't talk to anyone. And I just remember that experience being awful. But I don't know why it was awful. Why wasn't I leaning in there to go, I deserve to be here because I've been invited, and that's enough to know that you're worth it. And so when I came home, I never told, like at the book launch, I told this story, and my best mate said, I never knew you went to the launch of the Dolce and Gabbana. I never knew you worked with Chanel, because these stories felt like a different part of my life.
Mm.
Whereas there's something interesting about that. That's imposter syndrome to a point, and I'm not a psychologist or a psychiatrist, so I'm not going to tap into my understanding of that. But what I'm learning to understand as a 50-year-old man versus a 30-year-old with an ego is that we're going to be okay. We fall out, we find ourselves in these environments, and we need to embrace them in a way that leads to the next chapter. And we can always connect the dots looking back, but not forward, which is my favorite Steve Jobs quote.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, why? I think we're too controlled by the fear of the unknown versus the curiosity of possibility as to what might happen. I just try to come back to this one rule is we can come up with 1,000 reasons why we shouldn't, but isn't it much easier just to come up with a simple reason as to why we should?
And what happens if I like that what if. I had a guest a couple of seasons ago whose daughter, when she was 4, always said, well, but if, well, but if, what about if? And so in their family now, what they always say when they're like coming up with new ideas, what but if we do this? What but if we do that? And I love that because I do feel like we're led by fear. There's so much fear swirling around. Now, I won't say more than ever because this is the only time I've ever been here on Earth, but I feel like many of us are making decisions in our day-to-day life and politically and culturally and from a place of really wanting answers and really wanting to know. And I feel like for me, what my creative practice all my life has given me is much more comfort around uncertainty. Like when you were writing your book and you just dumped it all out onto the page, there's an ugly stage in any creation. There's an ugly stage in a painting. There's an ugly stage in a book. There's an ugly stage in a culture and in a society and in a civilization. I happen to think we're going through our ugly stage right now and that something really incredible is about to emerge. I really do feel that way. That's a side note.
Same.
But I think we are conditioned to believe that that we need to know. And if we can't know, then we're just not going to do it. We're going to take the safe way, which is often actually a much more damaging way. So I guess what I'm getting to ask you is around creativity being a compass, because it really seems to me like you hit a place in your life and in your work where you really turned to creativity, which in my interpretation of that is like gut instinct, inner knowing, desire, like this like invisible set
Yeah, for
of
sure.
tools that are wordless. But and they make up together, they make up this thing we call creativity. But that you really turn to that set of instruments within you to be your compass. And I wondered if you remembered what led to that, what was going on in your world at that time, what else shifted when you realized I'm going to be somebody who scratches the itch of curiosity rather than somebody who sits there and builds a little brick wall around myself and stays safe inside of it.
I like this idea of the language around transition. I think it's a really
Mm.
soft conversation. And when we talk about climate or a changing planet or a changing political climate, we're thinking of the end. We're getting to these extremes of left and extremes of right. I'm super comfortable in the middle. I think the middle is a safer place in a sense of I don't I'm not opposed to the extremes, but this idea of transition is a really beautiful way to look at our lives. So instead of going, I'm changing this job and that's going to be a different thing and the end is going to change, if we're not thinking of the end and we're thinking about being continually present in what's happening and what I can control, then I like this idea of transition. And I sit on the board for climate charity called Design Declares. And the role of Design Declares is to align design agencies to rethink their processes to try and understand the outcome or the end point of what we're creating. And what that means is if we're designing for humans, we're thinking about human needs now, but we're not considering the implications or the behaviors or the systems in which humans operate. So there could be negative consequences of the thing we make. A great example is single-use plastics. Whilst that's an incredible convenience for me, it's an extraordinary inconvenience for the planet, which means in the
Right.
end, we all lose. So this idea of putting wind farms in the ocean is a terrifying idea because I love the ocean. But is it as terrifying as the idea of a declining climate where all of a sudden we don't have access to simple pleasures of energy or and things like that? So when we think about those solutions as transition solutions, we don't know what the solution to climate change is. So we've got to find them. And the way to find them is through small bite-sized evolutions of design or
Yeah.
creativity or making things that get us through that process. In terms of the second part around what led me to this idea of chasing curiosity, I think I came to it really late in life. I grew up playing sport and every other young guy in Australia, I wanted to play cricket for Australia. And then I went snowboarding and I had no connection or emotional connection to anything other than myself or what I could do, what I could make or where I could go. And but as you get older and you become a parent, you start to reflect. And I think my mum's illness gave me a lot of going back and I'm trying to understand my relationship with her, which was always a positive one. And when I started to write the book, one of the things I started to learn was when I was a kid, I became a designer late in life, like late. My role was always client side. So I'm always working with brands and selling brands and marketing brands. It wasn't until later that I decided I wanted to make the brands or be accountable for what we make. So that's my transition into design in my sort of early 30s. I'm now 50. But to understand that transition into that, I started to remember these stories where my mum would drive to her hometown, which is a 5 hour drive west of Sydney, and we'd stop into old knickknack stores and she'd pick up old things like old pieces of furniture or old watches. And she'd always say, I wonder what this would say if it could talk, like the lives this thing has lived prior to the place it's ended up. And a couple of things happen with that is one is you start to look at things differently. So they're not just as consumables, they're things that matter to someone that can have more than one life over and over. And it also comes back to the importance of what we make and how we make it. So these stories become really interesting to me. I think that was my early introduction to design and creativity is that the connection between everything we see and own and touch was made by someone somewhere and started in a room. And that I find that really inspiring, the idea that someone sat down one day with a pencil and paper and penned out something like a chair or a table or a cup. And that became the evolution of our lives. And we don't question it, but we use it every day. And then when you want to plug yourself into that, It's what can I make? What can I create? And I also think people don't like to do things because it's been done before. I
Yeah.
actually think that's a reason to do it again. The fact that it's been done, I love this idea that's someone else's endpoint, but that's your new beginning, right? That's their interpretation of where it ended for them. Your interpretation of how do we improve that thing or make it better or make it personal to us or our community. So I don't think the idea of I had this dream and I didn't do it because everyone's done it. I actually think that's a cop out. I
Hmm.
think that's the reason to start because we know it's valuable. We know people need it. So let's extend and improve on that.
I also love the idea of, another guest that I had, Meredith Height Estevez, said this a long time ago about joining a song that's already going, like this kind of long, like a creative, like our creative offerings, music, and she's a musician, composers and painters, and that when you pick up where you are in this timeline and you add to that body of work, you're joining a conversation that's been going on since the beginning of time. And there's this way that when you sit down and you're composing a piece of music, maybe you're actually even engaging with Beethoven in your own way. And that there's this, like you said, it's not already been done and checked off the list, but that it's this kind of continuous flow thing that you get to add to. You get to add your unique voice to.
Totally. Yeah, I
Yeah,
don't think anything's uniquely original, and I don't think it should be. I
it
think
shouldn't
that's just
be.
such a tough place to approach. And of course, the arts is inherently creative and it's critically important to society, culture. I don't think there's anything more important, to be honest. And I think when you find people studying academia or going through a PhD, it's their connection to the arts that gives them inspiration to keep evolving that and keep
Yeah.
contributing to academics. And I think it gives us a lift. But I don't feel like people do get caught up in this idea of I want to start a clothing label, but there's enough out there. That's a valid point. There is enough. We don't need more clothing labels, but we do need better ones. We do have the ability to move into spaces where we think about systems, climate, humanity, community impact, and we can build things that replace the things that don't consider those things. So I just think that everything has a purpose and a place in time. And the idea of you coming up with an idea that's unique, whether it's a song or a business idea or a book, just do it. Just write the song. There's a great interview with Rick Rubin where he says these great artists like the Red Hot Chili Peppers come in and the lead singer says, I can't remember his name. He says, I want to do a song that sounds a bit like this Johnny Cash song and that one. And so he says, and Rick Rubin is, well, copy it. Just copy it because you'll never sound like Johnny Cash.
Yeah.
No one will ever connect the dots.
Yeah.
And there's creative license in a sense of taking from that. And I think there's truth in this. I think if you look at all the legal cases around music in time, there's only a handful, I think, in terms of that I'm aware of, where someone's gone, you just directly copied my song and that's wrong. I feel like what we bring to something is what we bring our own voice, our own stamp. And I think we've been educated out of that. I think we've been told maybe you're infringing. I don't think stealing is right. I do think bringing your own creative voice to an existing problem or an existing idea is okay. I think it's always going to end up different and it's always going to be unique. And if that wasn't true, we'd only ever have one clothing label, but there's 1,000, there's
Yeah.
millions. It's similar with music. It's similar with business. I just think the hardest part is starting, and we can really give ourselves a lot of reasons why we shouldn't. It's again coming back to that one reason why we should, which is also hard, but it's empowering.
In your book, you talk about creative confidence. What has creative confidence meant for you? And was there a time you didn't have it? How did you build it? What is it? Why is it important?
I think it comes back to those places at the start where we're talking about how do you find yourself in those rooms. I think that is creative confidence. It's the ability to start. And this come up at my book launch the other night. We had a nice sit down with 100 people in the room, and one of the questions was, how do I start creating? And I think you've got to create space for it. You've got to come back and say, what are the things that are stopping me from creating or being creative? And what are the things that I can do to give myself the best chance to start the thing that I wanted to start? So confidence comes from, if we're talking about sport, it comes from repetition and practice. There's a thing I write about in the book, a chapter, that when my brother and I grew up, my parents owned an indoor cricket center. Now, I'm pretty sure in Canada, you don't know what that is, but that's probably in the terms of basketball, it's probably like having a shooting lane in your house Or in baseball, it's probably like having a batting lane with a batting
Yeah.
machine in your garden. So we grew up with that advantage. And growing up in the 90s in Western Sydney, excuse me, with that machine, my brother and I had an advantage over everyone else, probably in Sydney. So we have some great junior records of great results because of the access. The environment shaped our potential in a way,
Sure.
but it only does part of the job. So the next part of that is, okay, that doesn't mean I'm going to go pro, because there's a lot more other things we need to consider: nutrition, health, performance. But the one thing that I can take away from that is that the repetition gave me confidence, and it gave me the
Mm.
ability to walk into a game on a Saturday. And whilst the other young lads had their dads throwing them balls on the weekend until their dad's shoulder got tired after about 25 minutes, my brother and I had a machine that would bowl us 1,000 balls during the week. Of course, going into a Saturday, we have an advantage, and that's confidence. So, in a similar way, in business, if you want to write a book, start writing for yourself, start journaling. One of the things that I tried to do to give myself confidence to write was to wake up in the morning with my laptop open with a blank page in front of me, just a blank Google Doc. And I'm not, because I know the idea of getting up and rebooting and starting and opening Word is probably just a couple of steps too many for me to go, right, at 6 a.m, do I really want to write? But you just got to give yourself the best chance. And the idea of writing 58,000 words that I deleted gave me the confidence to write the 58,000 words that I wanted people to hear, that I was comfortable with people hearing. And if I go back to that Dolce Gabbana night where I walked in the room feeling terrified, I wouldn't walk in the room today feeling terrified. And if I saw Ronaldo, the famous soccer player, I'd probably walk up and say hello, because we're in the same environment. We've both earned the right to be there. That's confidence. That's creative confidence. But it's also justifying by being brave enough to look back and understanding the things that you did that were valuable and brave, that give you the reward of being in environments that look a little bit different, a little bit scary. Creative confidence is just the ability, when curiosity starts to pop up for you, you chase it.
I'm just imagining the listener who's sitting there listening to this right now going, that sounds amazing. I'd love to have the confidence to believe that I deserve to be in those rooms, or that I even have the confidence that I deserve to write down the thoughts that come through my head, but I just feel so stuck in my story of who I am and what's possible for me and my imposter syndrome, and I actually can't see a way out of it. What would you say to that person?
I feel that too. So I go through the same thing. So even now. So I don't feel like the idea of this isn't creative confidence, isn't to never ever feel stuck. I
Mm.
feel like being stuck is okay. I feel like we should be stuck from time to time. It's a time to reflect and pause and work out a way to take a step forward. And whatever that step is, and I love this term of, we can look at our fail stories I talk about my fail stories as often as I talk about my wins. I think that's great for me to try to soften them, to be more comfortable in the idea that I made all these mistakes, but I'm still here and I'm still okay. And I feel like I've had businesses that have just not worked, that have gone broke. And that was devastating for me at the time. When my business went broke in the sort of mid 2000s, I had a baby. My daughter Mia was 6 months old. We had to sell our house. We had 8 company cars on the lawn. And it wasn't through anything that I did. It just was circumstance that meant, like, all of a sudden this business wasn't viable anymore. And it was also inexperience. I was young, guessing my way through this business, which I suppose gives me a lot of confidence now that if you can make it up then, you can probably do a better job of making it up now, because we just learn. But one of the things that happened to me was I was really depressed and I was flat and I wasn't going out of the house. And I was like, this is it. I've failed. My life is over. This is me now for the rest of my life. And my mate Josh Evans rang me a few times and said, you got to come out and have a drink. And he knew that I loved to swim in the ocean. So he rang me and said, come down to Bondi Beach on the weekend. We'll go for a swim out to sea and we'll go around the headland and we'll come on in. And so I said, okay, let's do that. My wife said, we'll go early because I don't want to bump into friends in Bondi. Obviously, no Bondi Beach. It's a very famous Australian beach. And so I had a shop in Bondi at the time. And so we get down to Bondi and we go for a swim, and I jump in the water. And I'd said to Josh, I just don't want to see anybody. I don't want to talk to anyone. I don't want to talk to old staff. I'm a failure in my head. I don't want to see people. So I jump in the ocean and we swim out to sea. And I think I'm about 400 meters out to sea. And I hear someone call my name, because I'm pretty distinctive, bald guy floating out to sea. And they know I like to swim in Bondi. And so it's Amanda, and she looks at me and she says, Ben, what are you doing out here? Hey, how you going? And the first thing she asked me is, how's business? Now, to paint a picture, I'm 400 meters out to sea, floating in the ocean in one of the busiest beaches in Australia. And I'm thinking the first question everything I'm trying to avoid was just, it came to me straight away. And interestingly, in that moment, her partner at the time was a guy called Darren Prowse. Now, Darren Prowse was a photographer for News of the World in London. And he's really famous for taking a photo of Lady Diana in her car accident and not releasing the photo. So he owns the photo, the only one of her where you can see her body in a car accident after she passed away. And he's quite famous for that photo, more importantly, for not releasing it to the media and keeping that. And he said he'll never release it. He later went on to become the mayor of Adelaide. So he was there, and I didn't know him, but he was distinctive through this mohawk that he had. And so I recognized him when it was all wet. And he came over and said, "Hey, mate, how you going?" He's got a really vocal Aussie accent, and he swears a lot, and I won't swear in the same way he did. But he asked me how I was going, and he could just tell that I just did not want to have a conversation with either of them. And I just said, "You know what, my business, it's just, I've had a tough time. I've just wound it up and I'm just going through that." And I thought, what does it feel like to be really honest about this as we're treading water? And he laughs and says, "Oh, mate, you know what?" He said, "If there's anything that we need to learn about that," he said, "if you look," because he could tell I was a bit flat. He said, "Look back at the beach." And he said, "On that beach, we've got doctors, lawyers, backpackers." He said, "There's people who write, sing, dance." And he said, "There's one thing we're all got in common today. We're doing this same thing for free. Good times don't cost anything. Being in nature doesn't cost anything." And that was my moment in my life where I went, two things. One is we can't avoid it. We can't avoid our past. So the things that shaped us to that point, good or bad, doesn't mean that we can't reset and reimagine what tomorrow can be or look like. So I think the other thing too was that connection to nature was the catalyst for me to go, in the next chapter of my life, I don't want to lose that. And I had lost that prior. So when I'm rebuilding the next phase of my life, I'm trying to do it in places that I love, in environments that light me up. We talked offline before about what Vancouver does for you. And when you talk about trees, your face just lit up. And that was the thing I was trying to reconnect with, was do it in the places that I love. And that gives us creative confidence. And then to do it around the people we love and we connect with, that gives us even more confidence, because it's going to reassure us that we're heading in a direction that is valuable. And when we're not, they're going to be honest with us and say, maybe you need to pull back. So if anything I take away from that story, and it's how I actually end the book. So now you don't need to read the book. It's at the end.
Still
But
need
the
to read the
idea
book,
is,
don't worry.
yeah, you still need to read the book. So when you get to the end,
Oh,
to me, it's this idea of we can't avoid our past, and having comfort in that means that you can move forward with confidence.
yeah, it's interesting. I'm glad you brought up nature. I feel like there's a huge correlation between nature for me and creativity. There are so many parallels in the things that I see. I'll go for a walk in the woods and I'll see how a little stream is coming down around a tree and the rocks are placed there. And I just think no artist could have put this here. There's so much inspiration and there's so much, it's showing us so much. And we're so disconnected from creativity or from nature and creativity. I don't think that's a coincidence. And I wonder how it's one of those things where eating well or lifting weights or taking your vitamins, or yoga or whatever, like there's these things that we have in our lives that when we're doing them, we know we feel better. We know we feel good. We know things work more smoothly, yet we avoid doing them. I know that I'm a better person when I'm journaling every day or going for a
Yeah.
walk in the morning, first thing with the dog. But I also know when I'm falling out of it, things start to feel crappy and then my life starts to go into bad direction. We're doing that collectively as humanity. Why? How can we pull ourselves out of that and go back to the things that serve us better, that we know we love, that we know actually make us feel good?
I think we're going to be less harsh on ourselves and just be a bit kinder to
Yeah.
ourselves and kinder to humanity. And I think that's what nature does. I think nature is soft, and we're not. I don't think humans are, but I think we
Mm.
need to work out how to be a little bit kinder. I live in nature. I live 400 meters from a beach in a very small coastal town, 1 hour from Sydney. Excuse me. That was a very deliberate choice to do that. It's expensive and it's challenging to live here. It's a hard place to live, because when you want to choose to live by the beach, then that's a luxury. So for me, it's, what do I need to do in my life to be present in these environments and these places with my family that give me that back? And today at lunchtime, I'll leave my home studio. I also have an office in Sydney, but I'll leave my home studio and I'll walk out of my door 400 meters. I'll do 400 stairs to the top. I'll look at the view of the ocean down the coast and I'll take a photo and I'll come back down and I will do my best work after that. Do my
Mm.
best work. But I don't want to do that walk, because it's hard to do it, but I will do it today. I'll find a way to do it. I just think we need to be kinder. I'm obsessed with nature. When I'm in nature, I feel more at comfort, more at ease. And if we can learn to find a balance between doing the things we love, and when I say that, I don't mean passionate. I think the things we're good at and get really good at those things. I think we get a bit caught up in the idea of chasing our passion. I don't know if that's right. I think we get passionate about the things we're good at. So I think when we take the pressure off ourselves to find what it is we're meant to be here for, and we just experiment and do the things we're good at and understand that those things we can do that we're good at hopefully have an impact on society and community and health and the planet, then all of a sudden we just start to build an ecosystem that's a positive one. I hear Scott Galloway talk about anyone who's ever said follow your passions, usually said by someone who's worth millions of dollars standing on a podium, who's failed 100 times and finally found their riches. And there's some truth to that. And I don't feel like anyone at 20 knows what their passion is. I didn't. But I did know looking back that I loved being in nature. I liked snow sports. I liked being in the ocean. The one thing I've learned about surfing, I'm a surfer and I don't do it enough, but I'm okay on myself about that. I've got friends in my community who surf every day and they cannot miss it. And that's also cool. But for me, the thing I like about it is it's like meditation. I'm a bad meditator, but I like the idea of meditating, but I don't do it. So when I'm in the ocean and I'm in nature, I'm sitting on a board. There's no notifications. There's no screen. There's no pings. So for me, it's forced meditation. I'm in the water and I'm around no one but nature and myself with my own thoughts. And that's a hard thing to do today. It's hard to get away from a screen or a notification, which I quite like. I like the idea of this modern technology because we can live in the places that we couldn't in the past, and we can travel and still create and still make and still dream big. So it gives us opportunity, but we've got to be really disciplined about how do we step away from it for a moment to really understand who we are and where we are.
What are your other creative practices? Where do you play the most with creativity?
Writing, absolutely writing for sure. I suppose that's my creative outlet. Not so much journaling, but writing. I try to write every Wednesday on my blog called Wednesdays on Medium. So I try to do that every week. It's something that every second or third week, I forget to do or don't do. I need to have something to write about. But the discipline's there to do it every week. That's my goal. But I'm comfortable in the idea that it's okay to miss. I get to share ideas, to break down things that are complex in my head and put them out on paper.
Do you give yourself prompts? I'm just thinking for me, when most of my work is very physical, I'll sculpt or I'll make jewelry or I'll do a physical thing. And if I have creative block, I'll just go start cleaning my studio and being near my supplies. And all of a sudden, I don't want to clean up anymore. There's this hunk of clay that I've been meaning to play with, and then I'm off. And that's how I've always dealt with creative block. But with writing, I'm curious, like, how do you deal with that? And I love that you give yourself grace around, look at the context of my week. I just did a book and I'm doing this, or I have the flu or whatever it is, like I love that you're being gentle with yourself. But there's also this thing that creeps in sometimes where it's like that part of your ego that wants to keep you small. That's, you don't need to write this week. Don't worry, you're fine. You don't need to. Yeah. And then before you know it, you're stuck and you're stagnant. So we have to kind of steward ourselves through those times a little bit. So what do you do? Are there things that you do to prompt yourself out of writer's block, or what's your process?
Exactly what you do. So I definitely rearrange my office or tidy it every 3 to 4 days. It's organization, it's putting things in order. And also I've got this sort of really weird habit of moving furniture. If things feel stuck, then it's a rearranging of the lounge room or the living room, and it's moving picture frames to other spaces so the board looks a little different to get me thinking differently. It drives my wife crazy. It literally drives her nuts. She sees it coming, and here we go. We're moving furniture and tables. I have a very big, I think it's A3 sketchbook, which lives on my desk, irrespective of where my desk is. I have it, and I write and draw, and I make notes. And when something inspires me, I make a note about why, and I write it down. I do that all the time. So the first version of my book was called How to Save the World from the Shower, which the publisher quickly said, that's a really bad name. Let's change that. But the idea of it was, when we're in the shower, we have these great ideas and we think about all the things we can do today, all the businesses we could make, or the business problem we had yesterday that we could start tomorrow to solve that. And we get out of the shower and we just forget and we get on with our life. And years ago, back in probably 2017, 2018, I started to take a whiteboard marker into the bathroom and write on the shower wall with my action plans, the things I wanted to create. And that sort of soon became a discipline that I didn't need to write it down anymore. I would just remember and get out of the shower and put it into my journal, into my diary. And I still have that habit. The shower is a really interesting place, and so is driving and being in traffic. So what I do now in traffic, if I'm listening to a good podcast and something comes up that's great, I actually press pause, open up my phone on my dictator and talk into it. And I transcribe that into notes and I keep those notes. And it's just a way to get things out of my head into paper in a moment of clarity because we don't have them
Yeah.
very often. Our head's a little cloudy. These things for me are really
Well, we
important.
often have when we're in motion. I feel like that's the trick about them is that we often have them when we're in motion. And when we're in motion, it's often a tricky time for us to capture them and write them down. So we do have to create some sort of like supports for ourselves to capture that stuff so we can come back to it later.
Yeah, I read in the Harvard Business Review that 70% of our ideas happen outside of work. So we're in our lives, in our daily lives, where 70% of the ideas that we have around what we want to do or create or make happen over coffee with friends or in the places. So I
Yeah.
think things like that are a great thing to do. Catch up with friends, have conversations, have coffee, sit on the beach on the headland and meet someone new and talk about life. Great ideas come from these things. And I feel like they're inspiring. And I love urban places as much as I love nature, but I couldn't live in the urban environment all the time. I feel like
Yeah.
Vancouver's a beautiful balance of that. A really rare balance of North Vancouver is it feels like you're in nature, but you're right in a city. It's really cool.
Yeah.
I spent a lot of time in Salt Lake City in Utah, and I have a very similar connection to Salt Lake City that you have to Vancouver because I feel like within 20 minutes, you're in Park City, Utah, you're in the mountains, or you're in Moab, or you're in St. George. You can have access to Earth and the planet and dirt or snow or water all within a very close space of the urban environment. And the thing I like about urban environments is the arts, the connection to things that we make and build. And I'm always inspired by old signs on walls that have been there for 40 years that are embedded in the brick, or new signs that show people the way to walk or go or direct them. So they're the things that I find really interesting. And so urban environments give me that creativity. The earth connects me and gives me space to think about how I want to contribute to that.
Yeah. I think that is number one key is even if you live in a really urban environment and you can't go and be hugging trees all afternoon or surfing in the are almost extreme examples for 99% of the people who are on earth today. Like we don't all live these more rural environments, but it's never as far as you think. You
No.
could go to a little park in a city and just sometimes I'll just go and I'll be like, where, let me hear for the bird. And if you switch channels for what you're tracking, you can hear it. Like all of a sudden, oh yeah, there's the birds. They're right there. They're making noise too. And I think it just like your journal of inspiration, you'll find more of what you're tracking. If you're
Yeah.
tracking for it and you're looking for it and you're trying to capture it when it comes to you or notice it when you see it, it then starts to become like, oh, a bigger part of of what you're aware of.
Yeah. Totally agree. Yeah. I totally agree with that.
So you say in your book, Lessons for Creativity, you say that's a book for people who feel stuck or disconnected. If somebody's right now going, okay, yeah, that's me. I'm feeling stuck. I'm feeling disconnected. Maybe I need to read your book. What do you think is like one of the big lessons from the book that you wish that that person and everybody could take heart right now?
I just think that if there's the interesting thing about this book, I'm not an academic. So I wrote about my stories and my experiences, and I've tried to understand what the insight was that got me into those places.
Mm-hmm.
And the biggest takeaway for me from this book is the idea of we're all curious about something, but we're not all willing to lean into that curiosity
Mm-hmm.
and find out where it goes. And if anything, I think it's a disservice to you. I think the amount of people I know who I have 3 kids, I couldn't do it on my own. I'm a wonderful parent with a wife who can raise and feed
Mm-hmm.
and do all these things. I'd be a nightmare on my own. And I always wonder, I've got friends who are single mums who go, oh, I couldn't do a business. I wouldn't know where to start, but they want to do it. It's like nothing is harder than what they're doing. Nothing will ever be harder than being a parent. Nothing in your life. And I'm always amazed that we can do that, but we don't believe we can do the other thing. Like it's extraordinary that the things that we do that we don't think twice about. I've got friends who have moved from London to Sydney and live in Sydney and have wanted to start a business but don't know where to start or don't have the confidence to do it. It is not as hard to start a business as it is to move a country, to lift your family and move them. And so I think we just have perspective. And the reason those businesses might not start or the reason a friend of mine might not have gone and done the business is probably more fear than anything. And we tell ourselves the reasons why we can't. So to understand the enemy of fear is curiosity. The outcome of curiosity is creativity. And to follow that path is creative confidence. If you're scared, chase curiosity. The fear will go away. It'll dissipate. I guarantee it.
Mm.
I just think it's so easy to get caught up on the stuck or the fear. And I just know in my experience, and again, this book is not about academic research or coming up with any science as to why, but in my experience, following curiosity, that fear, that voice in your head just fades. It just goes. And all of a sudden you find yourself down the line working on something that you always wanted to work on. And that's cool.
I just want to go back to something you said earlier about being more gentle with ourselves. I have this, it's a little heart-shaped wooden bowl, and I have a little deck of angel cards in it. And early day, like one of the very first podcasts I ever sat down and recorded, I had this little nudge to pull a card before each interview. I don't even know what it was about. I had this idea to do this and I did it. And I've done it for every episode. Before I sit down and I meet with my guest, I pull this little card out. And then I love to tell you at the end of the show, at the end of the interview, what that word was, because it's often one of the big moments from the episode that I love the most. And it is true again today. So the word that I pulled was compassion. And I feel like
cool.
with our creative practices, there is that grace is such a magic ingredient when we can be gentle with. You got stuck. You didn't want to do the thing today. I think a lot of us artist types, creative types, and maybe just humans in general are a little bit all or nothing. If I didn't do the blog post every Thursday that I said I would, there's no point in doing any of it. I'm just going to give it all. It's all for nothing now. We do that to ourselves.
Yeah.
And so I love that so I wanted to just underline that you brought that to us today, because I think that's such an important thing to drop into our hearts and just have growing. Is that self-compassion is so important. The very last question, and it's the last question that I ask all my guests, is the billboard question. So this idea that if you could whisper through this magical billboard into the ear and heart of every human alive right now, the thing that you feel is the most important thing that creativity can teach us to help us heal from all these imposter syndrome and negative stories that we have and limiting beliefs that we have about ourselves. But it was billboard size. What would it be? What would you put on that billboard?
Oh, it would be the we can. It would be a billboard of we can. It'll be a picture of humanity saying that we're accountable and responsible, not our governments, not our leaders, not what they promise us. It is literally down to us. And the billboard to me would be hopefully empowering to individuals or people to go, I'm responsible for the outcome of this country. I'm responsible for the outcome of this community, and bring it back to the small things that we can do every day. We were talking before about politics, and I'm happy to get into politics, but there was a real rise in Australia around independent leaders coming up and stepping up into communities. And for the first time, there's a majority of independent leaders getting a voice. And what that means is that people who want to see change are putting their hand up and doing something about it. And it's not just the two major parties, it's independents stepping in and going, I think I can do a better job of what you have done. And the community getting behind them and saying, yes, you can. And that's empowering, because like in Sydney, we had Zali Steggall, who was a professional Olympic skier, who's now a leader of one of our biggest electorates in Sydney, who is having a voice for climate, for community, for health, for creativity. And these things matter. And I think that Zali was a skier, and now she's a political leader, a voice for her community. And that's really important. For me, I think that we don't feel like we can. I feel like people think that it's someone else's responsibility to do these things. And I've spent 10 of the last 12 months in America. I've been in the US at both times when Trump was inaugurated. And it's amazing how many people go, it's going to happen now. You watch, you wait and see what he does. And I just think that the difference with that, in a country of 330 million people, Australia being a country of 30 million, I think we have accountability here to go that what I do and what my vote says matters a lot, but also how I behave and how I act in my community matters more.
Yeah.
So I think it's scary when we empower our government to have the answers for us. I feel like we just need to be able to go, what are the things that I can contribute or make or do? The second billboard, if we could have two next to each other,
Sure.
would be around climate and the planet. it'd be around the climate and just going, the things that we choose to buy, to embrace, to, I read the other day that to say thank you to ChatGPT costs a glass of water,
I know.
and that glass of water is energy. So that glass of water is wasted for life. It becomes dirty water. And so I just think we need to be a little bit smarter, a little bit wiser about how we build our future. And that is on everybody, not on just on our leaders.
I love that you said that. I think I'm 48 years old and I grew up in a very political town. My mom was a news producer and my dad was a political correspondent on our Parliament Hill. And
That's
conversations around the
cool.
dinner table were my mom was a NDP, which is more independent socialist union kind of party. And my dad was a conservative previous, that not far right conservatives of today, but traditional. And there was a lot of arguing and a lot of and chaos and also in media and journalism, there's a lot of drugs and drama. And so I just saw that whole world and was like, nope, I'm going to take a hard right. I'm going to go over here and be an
Yeah.
artist. And I acknowledge so much privilege in my life to be able to do that. Coming to now at this point in our history, our collective history, seeing what a critical point this is in our history. And I actually I cannot continue to not be involved and engaged. In some cases, enraged about some of these things. And I'm learning hard. I'm hitting the runway hard. Like I'm learning about the American political system and even more about our own political system. And I'm learning things about collapse. And it's a lot all at once. And
Yeah.
from my creative brain, and we touched about this is what I wanted to come back to. My creative mind and personality, when I look at what's happening from a systems perspective on Earth and with humanity, I get really excited because to me, the intelligence of the universe is basically saying, yeah, no, what you guys are, how you did it is you're all rational mind, you're no creative mind, you're glitching, you're going in circles, and you're in a downward spiral. You're destroying your planet. You're destroying each other's. There's so much hate there. And I feel like she's a she, is coming in and just going, no, we're going to wipe that all out. All that dies now.
Mm.
And so I'm excited about collapse in a weird way because the world that we created where saying thank you to ChatGPT is ruining water, that's not what any of us want anywhere in our systems. None of us want that.
No.
But what you've said is really important. It is not our job to point fingers at corporate decision makers or political decision makers or lawmakers or to be in charge of that. Actually, we really need to be in charge of that. And it doesn't need to be that you quit what I'm learning as I come into this work even more deeply. It doesn't mean I have to change directions. I can still be an artist and get involved in that. I can still contribute to my community in new and meaningful, like really meaningful ways without
Yeah.
needing to become a full-time activist. And I just want everyone who's listening to this to think about probably the thing that you love to do the most is the thing that will actually help the collective the most. And so just we can do it and we need you to do it, and we need to stop being scared of our gifts and actually engaging in the world with them in brave
Yeah,
ways.
I totally agree. I
Yeah.
totally agree with that. I agree 100%. It was so interesting. You look at our leaders, and there's Elon is talking about sending humans to Mars, which I originally just thought was hilarious, and now I'm starting to think it's a good idea because the quicker that guy can get to Mars, the better.
Starting with him.
Yeah, that's right. I think have fun up there. But
Yeah.
I just think it's such an odd thing to think that a leader of a country thinks that Mars is a better investment than Earth or all humanity or the people here. I was directly impacted by the USAID and the Doge cuts. We had a project in the US with an organization that was funded by USAID. And it's interesting when you are doing work that feels like it matters. It's really creative work. We spent a lot of time and energy into getting this relationship with this climate organization in the US. And we set that up, we got the contract, and then they were 700 staff deep, and now they're 10. And these guys are doing climate research, climate impact. And I couldn't feel like my connection to that was I can't feel like there's anything more important in my life that I need to be doing right now. But then for that to be cut because of money or because of potential fraud or potential waste, I just can't connect the dots. So there's something else happening here that doesn't add up. But in terms of what I can do is, okay, that stopped for us, but that doesn't mean I need to stop in terms of what I can do to contribute to climate. So some of the work that I then look at my role as a designer. And when I say design, I don't feel like we need to think of design in a sense of physical logos or websites. We need to think about design in terms of making things that solve problems. And that can be language, wayfinding, environments, and products. But more importantly, we need to start looking at the systems in which these designs and these products live. So I get to come back to that and look at systemic design foundations, so the foundations in which designs operate. So all of a sudden my work becomes different. So I go, okay, I've got to be a bit more accountable now because someone stole that from us, from all of us, that opportunity to solve that problem for that climate fund that I couldn't control, that you couldn't control. So what is it that I can control? It's the work I do every day. And so maybe there's a problem with design. Maybe design is broken. Maybe if we can build better systems for design, when we're not designing for humans, we're designing for humanity, then how does that look for me? It empowers me to come back and do better and go, okay, that was stolen. I had no control, but I have control over what I do next. And what I do next is improve the work, improve the rate, improve the conversation, improve the process, and hopefully impact systems and the way that we operate. And have conversations like this, which hopefully one person hears and says, that's cool. I'm going to be a bit more accountable for what I make. And that takes, well, we've been talking for an hour. So it's a small piece to give. And hopefully we all collectively feel more empowered to be accountable for our place in the world. So yeah, I think that's why politics is so important. It's personal, and people don't like to make it personal, but it's so personal.
It is
It's
personal.
all it is personal. It impacts people's lives. So voting is critical. Understanding why we vote is critical, and understanding what we're voting for is even more critical. But more important than that is being accountable for the things we do every day that contribute to a better society.
Yeah, and I'm back to the beginning of our conversation again, where you were talking about being on the red carpet with the flashbulbs and the people and feeling, oh, I don't belong here. I don't feel like I have a right to be here. I think a lot of people feel that way about politics. That's a world where these people live up on these gilded rooms and they're important men and they make big decisions, and I'm not smart enough to be in that room.
Important
And
men.
you know what I mean, though, the men who rule the
Men.
world.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what
White
I'm
men.
what I'm seeing is that I've not diagnosed, but I do believe that I have some undiagnosed ADHD. I have problems with can't visualize the way other people do. I'm not the same as all the people around me, and I've always felt less than because of that. And what I'm seeing is actually those differences give me a way of seeing the world that isn't like everybody else. And so I can say a comment every once in a while that can hit people differently. And so even in my own weird, what I would call dysfunctional brain, I'm able to offer something to the group that could be useful. And I feel like that's our job now as we mature as humans and as
Yeah.
we mature as humanity, is understanding that our weird dysfunctional gift containers that we have of these weird little collections of gifts that are so different across people are actually so required. All of those individual voices are so required, and important. Obviously, voting, but also engaging, like
Yeah.
getting to know the people who represent you. I spent half an hour on the phone with my MP the other day. I've never done that in my life. And it was a
That's
great
cool.
conversation. And I was able to say, obviously, you have my vote, but here's what I'm worried about. And I challenge you on this, and I don't totally agree with you on that. So how can we work together to that conversation felt amazing. I thought that world was off limits to me. I never thought that I was allowed to be in that world.
Yeah.
So I
That's
think,
cool.
yeah,
Oh, good on you.
I feel like there's an awakening happening. I feel like these things are being broken so that we can step into them. Big picture, I feel
Yeah, I
like
think that's true.
I think
I think
that
there's a
that's,
pattern of everything where things break and we start to go, okay, what can I do to resolve this? And you
yeah,
can definitely see that. It's extraordinary, especially what's happening in the States. It's so hard to watch.
yeah. It's hard to watch, but like I said, I'm hopeful. I'm cautiously optimistic. I don't know the timeline of it, but it seems to be faster than I thought it would be. So hopefully
Yeah,
we'll just
hopefully.
burn it. Because that's the thing that keeps coming to me in my meditation is there have been days when I've just been like, why don't you just crash their plane? And I know that's an evil thought, but the voice that I keep getting from wherever that voice comes from is, no, sweetheart, these guys have to burn themselves out. This darkness has to come up and out into the light so that it can burn, and then you'll be able to build the new thing. And your job, because you even know that this is something that's happening, is to be on the team of the people who are building the new thing. So get to work. And that's what this conversation is
Yeah,
about. And that's what this work is
that's great.
about, is building the new world.
Yeah, I love it, Kate. It's so good. So
Yeah.
good.
Thank you so
I read a
much for
really
joining
interesting.
me. That was awesome.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks for having me. It was cool. I loved it. It's good to catch up.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it was a pleasure.